Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. This is just a bit of a trigger warning for those who believe words are more injurious than sticks and stones. I really am so conservative I can't turn left even when I'm driving. In addition to giving trigger warnings to our viewers, Ron Hensel and I both drink coffee for your protection. This week, Mark Harris, president of the Spiritual Counterfeits Project, joins us to look at Christians and the success motivation industry. My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie Baby.
They can't get rid of me, even with hurricanes and everything else.
No,
Greetings.
We try.
You send everything your way, it just doesn't do anything. Greetings from now sunny Florida, where the palm tree came out, saw its shadow, and now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsor for this edition of the Unknown Webcast is World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time is gone. World's End Theology Outlet. Our regular legal disclaimer: our guest on today's webcast, insert name here, that's Mark Harris, has no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content of the Unknown Webcast, hereafter known as the webcast, although we probably will not mention it again. This satirical content includes any and all commercials, end credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything else that might fall under the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding this satirical content. Our regular notices: the opinions expressed on this webcast are ours and should be yours too. If you enjoy it, or if it really annoys you and you want to inflict it on someone else to ensure your continued access, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And as you do, never fear, this webcast is Y2K compliant. And don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite video channels. And now we introduce our guest, Mr. Mark Harris. Welcome, Mark Harris. I can see the crowd loves you already. So, greetings. You are the president of the Spiritual Counterfeits Project, and I believe you've been that since 2021.
That's right.
That was sadly because of the passing of the former president.
Mm-hmm.
And so
the former president was Talbrook.
Yeah. And was he one of the founders? I forget.
No, he was an early joiner.
Okay.
But the founder was Brooks Alexander.
And those guys were all former counterculture people.
That's right.
Which, of course, all Christians are now.
Well, Brooks Alexander kind of came out of the Jesus People movement in Berkeley. And Talbrook was actually under Sai Baba. He was a devotee of Sai Baba in India for a few years, and actually wrote a book about his experience. And then he came out, and he and Brooks met, and then Tal came into the organization, and then took over as president, I think, in the late 80s.
Wasn't Sai Baba's brother Ali Baba?
Well, he was a thief, that's for sure.
I get things mixed up, but I mean, so I'm wondering if you were part of that counterculture as well, or if you came from.
No, not really. I grew up in a Episcopalian home. And the joke about Episcopalians, at least the non-conservative ones, it was the next best thing to having no religion at all.
I think
And,
I think
so
Tucker Carlson said something like that recently, didn't
they're
he?
right. Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's embarked on reading the Bible, and Joy remarked on that the other day, how surprised he is to find what's in it. He said, I'm an Episcopalian. We don't read the Bible.
That's right. Yeah. First time I went to a Baptist church, and I'm wondering, why are all these people holding Bibles? We never took Bible to church when I grew up.
Well, one of my favorite comedians is a female. Her name's Kathleen Madigan. She's Catholic, and she talks about her friends, her Baptist friends and things who keep appealing to the Bible. And she goes, I don't think that's in the Bible, but we don't read the Bible. I'm Catholic. We go to Mass and we read the program and we see who died and what's for lunch.
Well, and that is pretty irreverent, to put it mildly. But yeah, but
so you have been with spiritual kind of SCP for
we call it SCP for short. Yeah,
SCP for how long now?
Well, I've been president for 2 years, but I took over the office in 2013 when Tall was leaving Berkeley and went to live in Maui, and he needed someone to take over the office. So my dual career involved running an accounting company. So a friend of a friend introduced us. I'd known about SCP since the late 70s. As a new believer, they were very helpful for me in understanding some of the Eastern thinking that I had come out of. And so I was really excited to relink up with them.
Well, wait a minute. I thought you said you weren't countercultural. You're Eastern thinking.
Well, I wasn't counterculture. What happened was I started reading some, it wasn't really Eastern religion. It was more along the lines of what we'll be talking about today. And I got really excited about it. Oh, this is a new understanding of what God is. And this is a new understanding of what life is. And I started telling everybody about it and telling my sister about it. And then one night I was telling a friend happened to be Catholic. And I described the whole thing about how God is not really a person. God is really this, I didn't use the word force, but that was kind of the idea.
Huh.
And he said, no, I've been led to, I've always brought up to believe that God is the personal God. And I don't think I'd really thought about it in depth yet. I thought that I was discovering this is what the Bible's really talking about.
Yeah.
And so that shocked me so much that I started studying and reading. And first, the book that I think was most influential in my conversion was Knowing God by J.I. Packer. And for the first time, understood what the gospel was. And so I was never a part of an Eastern group. It's just that I was heavily influenced in my thinking prior to my conversion.
Okay.
So just for those who are viewing who may not have even heard of SCP, you've been around a long time. One of the older missions, if you will, to these kinds of groups and things. And we have a website, SCP, and the link is in our description panel below. And how far back to the articles that has been produced by SCP? How far back do those go?
Well, the ones we have on hand that are not yet on the website would go back to the late 70s. But we didn't have, those are all out of print. And so I still have to scan those and put them on the website. Eventually we'll have everything on there, but it's going to take some time. But the ones that are actually on there available, go back about 10 years, something like that.
Okay. So
eventually everything on there, either to purchase in print or to read online.
Okay, good. So there's good resources.
Yeah.
So for the viewer, just a heads up, today what you're watching is pre-recorded. We had a couple of things that came up, one to do with a health issue that I have to have someone attend to. And Ron, he's busy being a Presbyterian on today. So
we're having a little thing we call Presbytery, coincidentally. So, yeah.
So you can complain all you want, but we won't be able to post it on here while
And
we're
yeah, so we're pre-recorded, so we'll do no good to storm the studios. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't storm the studios. Even if you could, even if you knew where they were,
yeah.
we won't be there.
So that'd
So
be very
Mark,
disappointing.
I was fascinated by the topic that we're talking about today, um, on the success motivation industry and
Mhm.
Christians and the success motivation industry. And in part because as I became a Christian, I had Christians handing me books by Napoleon Hill, for example, Think and
Yeah.
Grow Rich. And I read it and I was fascinated, but it seemed to me, it didn't seem to line up with what I was reading in the Bible. But I didn't know enough about the Bible to really say it's wrong. And of course, then you have others as time goes on. You were mentioning one of the popular ones these days. I forget his name. Tony Robbins.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Everybody loves Tony Robbins. And by that time, though, I look at that and I go, okay, how does this kind of differ from, I don't know, Kenneth Copeland or name it and claim it theology, or somehow there's a mystical force that you can tap into to make yourself healthy, wealthy, and not necessarily wise, but hopefully wise.
Mhm.
What made you interested in this? And because you've written several articles on it, and
Right.
why is it important for Christians to deal with?
Well, the way I got involved in it was I was a brand new believer, and someone introduced me to this salesperson who was selling a goal setting program. And I had been trying to figure out, how do I get organized? I wanted to accomplish great things, this new believer excitement. And this was a program called The Dynamics of Goal Setting by Paul J. Meyer. And I started getting into the program at the same time. I'm a new believer and starting to get discipled. And I started to not be able to reconcile the two. I'm being taught this over here and this over there. How do I put those two together? And because I got really into this goal setting program and studied it and really thought, in fact, I even started selling it. But after a while, the more I learned, the more I saw, okay, there are some major problems here, but I don't understand them. But I better put this aside. And I put it aside, but I kept thinking about it. I'd go back and I'd read it every once in a while. And the more I learned about Scripture, the more I understood why there were problems in it. I kind of always kept that in my mind. And then I was starting to put together my notes for it. And I suggested to Tall that I do this article series, and that motivated me to put it into its final form.
So the motivation industry motivated you to do the
That's
article.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, it's very important. It's very important, especially for a lot of our Christian businessmen are getting training. Their companies will put them into training, and they'll get motivational speakers. And a lot of these motivational speakers are drawing water from the same well that it actually has influenced a lot of the health and wealth preachers. But the difference is that the success motivation industry does not present itself as a religion. It has very important worldview issues that make it religious in one sense, but it's not like you won't hear about Jesus, and they don't talk about God very much, although they try to borrow some things. But a lot of them are influenced by some of the same, like Phineas Quimby, who was a mesmerist, and he was kind of the start of, in the middle 1800s, there was an explosion of not just cults like Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, but what was kind of collectively called New Thought.
Yeah.
And some of the more religious ones were the Unity School of Christianity, Christian Science back then.
Yeah.
A lot of those were kind of based upon these same ideas. And then New Thought, the less religious New Thought, then led to a lot of these books that were written that were not necessarily intended to be a religious book, but they were either motivational books or books that were helping to, explain to the layman, here's what's really going on in the Bible. What they're preaching in the churches is simplistic. Here's what's really going on.
Okay.
So
simplistic. Here's what's really going on, and
I can explain that too, but I didn't want to go too long in between questions.
Okay. So, I did a series on cults at my church. When I got into Christian Science, I covered Phineas Quimby. The idea, when I think of them, that their ideas of your mind over matter, basically,
right,
that seems to feed right into think and grow rich. Like somehow what you're thinking. Now, of course, I think we can all agree that your thoughts have power over you, and they have power over your behavior. And I never read Napoleon Hill, so maybe that's all he's saying. But you kind of get this impression from the title that it's more than that. Is it more than that?
Oh yes, absolutely. He was, I think, careful, and a lot of these guys were careful, because if you think about the times when they were writing, most of America had some form of a Christian worldview. They might not have been Christians, but that's how they thought. Even in Hollywood movies, they were respectful of the faith, and they kind of assumed this is how people think. So when they're introducing something really new, they're not going to be fronting. They're not coming out front with that.
Yeah,
it's really in their thinking. What Napoleon Hill and others that followed him, they would describe God as infinite intelligence.
Yeah,
and their thinking was that not that there's a personal God, but that God is the infinite intelligence that we're all connected to. Very similar to Eastern thought, a Hindu thought.
right.
But he wouldn't come front with that. But a lot of what his teaching was you can control your destiny. And so here are the methods, here are the techniques to do that. You've got to change your thinking about how things operate in the universe. And so this idea of an impersonal universe, that's the idea there. Very similar to the Force from Star Wars, which is also borrowed from the same thing. That it's like you've got a plug, and if you'll just plug in to that, then the power has to come to you. So it's not a personal power, it's an impersonal power. And if you will learn how to harness that, then you can take charge of your life, grow rich, richness wasn't everything, but it was, of course, that's what usually attracts people. But you'll be able to control your life, control your attitude, your feelings, and create happiness for yourself.
I just was at the Parliament of World Religions, and among a lot of course, Eastern metaphysical groups were there, Hindus, Buddhists, and so forth. And one of the booths that I stopped at was a New Thought guy. And had an engaging discussion with him, because New Thought, as you point out, it really is not that far from Eastern mysticism. It's pantheistic, essentially. And I posed the question of, how do you know what's true? And so he said, well, we all have inner knowingness.
Yes.
I said, okay, so explain that to me. How is it that we have inner knowingness, and how do we know that my inner knowingness and your inner knowingness are compatible? And he said, well, of course they're compatible. I go, well, how would you know that, though? Is that just your inner? What if, for example, I thought rape was good and beneficial? My inner knowingness told me that. How would that comport with your? He goes, well, your inner knowingness would never do that. I go, well, how do you know that? As your inner knowingness, my inner knowingness. And I said, as a matter of fact, two evolutionists did an interesting book called The Natural History of Rape. Now, they're not saying that rape is good, bad. They're saying this is just how evolution works, where the less desirable males could force themselves onto females, impregnate them, and carry on their gene pool. So obviously their inner knowingness informed them of the need to do that, And so rape isn't wrong for everybody. Obviously, your inner knowingness would legislate how you should behave, and ours may be different, but you can't really say mine's wrong, could you? And he was stuck and stumped. He just didn't know what to do with that.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance in the movement, but I can relate to this because when I was thinking that way before my conversion, I didn't try to think it through that. It's so exciting. The idea is so exciting that you don't want to question it too much, and you don't want to reconcile it with other things. But Tony Robbins wrote a book, I think it was called The Giant, something about unleashing the giant within. But this is their idea that we've all got within us. We're all divine on the inside, everybody. But the problem is we have not tapped into that. And we've been, the problems in our world are because of people that have violated the universe in some way. And that's been passed on to all of us, and all this negative thinking and all the wars and everything. It's all because of people not realizing that they've got this divine spark within this nature, and they've got to be expressing that. And so it's all interconnected. Now, I don't think they ever explain away. They can't really explain sin very well.
Yeah.
And except that it's bad conditioning or something. And my question was always, well, if we're all divine within, how is it possible that we can do that? And the only explanation is more closer to what you saw in the Force, where the dark side could also access the Force, like the side of light. Light and darkness could both access the same power source. But you won't get there's no systematic theology of this movement, where there's no Bible of the movement. So you can't go someplace and say, how can I get an answer to this exact question?
That could be really inconvenient.
How is something like this is very popular? Of course, Oprah Winfrey loved it and was promoting it to everybody. Rhonda Byrne's book, The Secret, the pseudo law of attraction is how is described by naysayers. How does that fit into this whole industry, the law of attraction?
Well, the success motivation industry kind of has a spectrum. And on one side are just the practical teachers, and they're teaching how to manage your time, how to win friends and influence people, things like that. It's all very practical. But the other ones on the other extreme are more really into the metaphysical side of it. And they're the ones that are going to be talking about this kind of thing. And the law of attraction is one of the many principles that you'll see taught in the success motivation industry that just says, once you set your mind to something, the universe is cooperating with you and bringing those things to you. And what it's really saying is you are interconnected with the universe. This is a very Eastern thought, right? That your divinity is connected with the universal divinity. And so once you set your mind to something, that universal divinity is bringing it to you. And so it's very much an issue of, this is how men, especially men that are in sales, they love control. Yeah. Anything that can allow them to control things, they really go for it. And so this metaphysical explanation is really, there's a lot of guys that will shy away from that, but some people will really get into it and they'll say, oh, this is why it works. It works because the universe is cooperating with me, this impersonal power that I'm plugging into.
I hear a lot of people, like I see them on social media referring to the universe as if it is some kind of personal entity.
Right.
So does this some way trace back to all that? I mean,
yes, it's actually, and if you could get somebody to define it, you'll probably get several different definitions. But I think it's what I've read. It sounds more impersonal. It's like electricity. It's just out there, and we're all like, if we were electric beings. and the universe is made of electricity, then all we have to do is plug our power cord in.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't have anything to say about what you do. It doesn't have a will of its own. The most important thing is your will as an individual, not that there is no divine will. It's just an impersonal force.
But
Well-
you know, it's like I just did a search on the phrase "offend the universe." Somebody says, "What did I do to offend the universe?" And so I think I'm pretty sure you're right that if you back them up against the wall, they would say, "Oh no, the universe is impersonal," and yet they can't help but speak of it in personal terms.
Well, and I think that's probably a little bit of the influence of New Age thought and Eastern mysticism, is that they like to call this divine thing God. And the reason is so that they can get an entrance into the Western world. They will say this is God, but then they'll redefine this is what God really is. You think God is in their ridicule, a man upstairs, but what we know is that God is this infinite power. Now, the interesting thing is, if you're a young believer and you're just learning about the omnipotence and the omnipresence and the eternity of God, you know that God is not a simple being. God is far beyond what we can understand. But they've actually taken something away, and they don't realize it. Well, once you take away the will of God and the personhood of God, you're not left with a great deal of what God really is.
Right.
And what it really does is it makes you God. That's the important thing to them, is that you're the one that's in charge. This famous quote by, what's his name? I keep forgetting his name, but I am the master of my fate. I'm the captain of my soul. That one. That's what they want.
Well, some of this deception, they actually do use biblical passages, and it sounds, at least Byrne does. And she has a 3-step process: ask, believe, receive. That sounds very word faith to me.
Oh yeah.
And to tie that to some kind of Christian idea, she goes to Matthew 21:22. All things whatsoever you ask in prayer, believing, you shall receive. So it implies at least that it's a Christian concept that she's promoting. Kenneth Copeland would go along with that.
Mm-hmm.
I would add one other thing. You're talking about there's no single definition, and I think that is true, that all of them would adhere to. Reminds me of Wicca. I talk with a lot of witches, and if you ask any Wiccan what Wicca is, they start off with this statement: Wicca for me is, and then fill in the blank.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is no universal definition of Wicca, nor universal practice within Wicca. And they are essentially, as they do spell casting, they are trying to cause the universe to conform to their will. Isn't that what's going on here?
Yes, that's very much so. I'm not as familiar with Wicca, but there's a lot of commonalities. You can see all of this is right from Satan. You can see it very clearly. Right from the first deception in the garden, that you can be like gods. All of these different teachings will have some variation on it. And when they are using the scriptures, they don't understand the Bible, but they'll grab these verses and passages and they'll twist them to fit their particular meaning. And they have the deception is really, it's a very powerful deception for those who don't know the scriptures very well yet. They're going to cast doubt on your traditional understanding of the Christian faith. They'll cast doubt. Right. Then they're going to offer a more enlightened understanding. Here's a more enlightened understanding of the Christian principles. And then they'll go to the text and they'll say, look, this is what this is really talking about. So if you're talking to a Christianized public, which first half of last century or most of last century, you had to quote, a lot of it, still people would talk about, even on our vocabulary today, people will say, oh, this is the Bible of engineering or something. people will still use that word. People still respect the Bible. And so you've got to ease their conscience that they're not going into something that is dangerous or heretical. They might not even care about heresy, but they're still kind of afraid. And so this kind of eases their conscience. Oh, I see. This is what the Bible's talking about. So it's safe.
Right. That's exactly right. So, and we've talked about this, Ron and I talked about this a lot with a variety of groups, is it seems like every religion wants to attach Jesus and the Bible to what they're doing as a sort of like a good housekeeping seal of religion.
Yeah, that's right.
A good Jesus keeping seal of
yeah.
Right.
That's right.
We have Jesus. Now, they have to redefine Jesus. They have to redefine the text of Scripture they're using, because in context, it doesn't support what they're saying.
That's right.
So you have that with the success motivation industry. You have that with Hinduism, Buddhism. You have that with Wicca. And you have that with some teachers within the church, let's say, who might stand up in their pulpit and say, "This is my Bible." But what does that mean to them? We have a sponsor that talks about one of those.
Yeah. Well, yeah, our friends at World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time is gone, have some questions. Are you still trying to figure out how to clean up in the ministry business? Do you want to finally learn how to get to the bottom of growing a successful church? Would you like to flush away your failures and start having your best church now? Well, then you need Charlatan's Ultra Soft. There is never any shortage of Charlatan Ultra Soft, and it is personally tested by Joel Osteen, the man himself, because nothing says theologically soft like Joel Osteen. It provides comfort where it counts. It wipes away even the most stubborn orthodoxy, and it comes with a money-back guarantee. So keep those butts in the pews with Charlatan Ultra Soft, available exclusively at World's End Theology Outlet. So earlier we were talking about the idea that we're the master, we are in control of our own destiny, and you were alluding to a poem named Invictus by William Ernest Henley, which ends, "It matters not how straight the gate, how charged the punishments, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." The idea that we're in charge of our own destiny, of course, it reminds me of that famous scene from Back to the Future when George McFly said, "I am your density." and he really meant something very different. He wanted to be a particular girl's destiny.
Oh, right.
and he was, his own son, Marty, gave him the words that he proceeded to botch up. But, does this organization, do these movements, do they have actually set phrases that you're supposed to tell yourself, like little success mantras?
Yeah, they're called affirmations, and this is a very common technique that is used. And you tell yourself what you want to be. For example, one of the ones in the program that I was using would say, if you're a junior executive in the company, you look in the mirror every day and you tell yourself, "I am the president of this company. I am the president of this company." And he says, "Don't worry that it's not true. Your affirming it is going to make it true." So there are many kinds of affirmations.
It's kind of a name it and claim it,
Exactly. Yeah.
Blab it and grab it. Just say it, don't spray it. That's what I would say.
Right. But the name it and claim it they'll bring God in some way, whereas you're dealing with more of an impersonal force in the success motivation world.
Yeah. So, there's so much overlap here between
lots of overlap.
The word faith movement, the success motivation industry. So I think we might have kicked around some, I go back, to the around 1980. I must have been the time I first heard the name Zig Ziglar. who professed to be a Christian, and I have no reason to question that. Maybe you do. Maybe you have information I don't have. But in any case, he was like one of the biggest names around that year and continued to be until he died.
Right.
I remember I was working in a savings and loan. Do they still have savings and loans? Well, anyways, I was working in one. And these are pretty rough times, 1981, 80. You know, we had this new thing that we were supposed to sell. And, you know, I'm a customer service rep in a savings loan. I don't sell. You come to me, you tell me what you want, I give it to you, right? Well, for some reason, they thought, you know, Ronald Reagan had created this thing called, no, it wasn't even that. It was something to do with selling the value of your life insurance policy, how you could sign it over to the bank and yet somehow still have it. And that was going to be quite a sales job. And I was not trained in insurance, so I had no idea what I was talking about. But they were going to tell us, what to say, how to say it. But in the meantime, they brought in, for some strange reason, they brought in a motivational speaker to try to get us pumped up. Now, mind you, we're not making any commissions off of this. You know, it's like, yeah, I could see bringing a Zig Ziglar type in to pump somebody up who's going to go out and he's going to make try to make millions. We were just going to make our salary for doing this.
Right.
And he brought in this motivational speaker, and he's trying to run. And this is my first exposure to any kind of, live motivational speaker. And he was literally being heckled from the seats because everybody. Really? Well, yeah, because it's kind of like, how do you motivate people who don't even want to be motivated? I just want to get through the day and please my boss. I just want to do what my boss tells me to. So you're trying to, am I going to have a quota for how many of these I'm going to sell? Actually, they never did do that. I think they were trying to brace us for the fact that they were really putting us in an awkward position. And these things never really took off. This financial product never took off, at least in our institution. So sometimes motivational speaking, in my experience, it's just, there's some audiences it's just not going to cut it. Right. It's almost like you have to be pre-motivated.
Yeah,
you want to be motivated.
That's why I mentioned up front why salespeople.
Yeah,
salespeople are of us usually of a certain temperament anyway.
Yeah,
and a lot of executives where what they do and how well they do it that day is going to determine their salary. So, like if you try to do this kind of a seminar with a bunch of bookkeepers,
right?
They just don't get it. But part of that's because they're tempered. They think very differently about life.
Right.
They tend to be more conservative. They're more practical, and it's really the people that are their industry forces them to be motivated every day.
And they know that they will wake up one day and they will need to kick themselves in the pants, right, so to speak. So really they're coming to these people to tell them how to do that. How do I light a fire under myself when nobody else is going to be around to do it?
You raise a kind of interesting issue here on this. I had, as I mentioned, I had been in business for years in construction, and I sort of semi-retired, and my son decided to open a construction business. And after a while, he contacted me and he said, I don't know how you did this for 30 years, but could you come to work for me part-time? And I thought about it, and I said, sure. So he had a client. He was looking at a project, and he was a little concerned, and he wanted my input because the guy was really pressuring him on certain issues. And so I agreed, and I went to the project, and I met with the owner. And as I was walking through the house, I was looking at his bookshelves. I love bookshelves. And I noticed that most of his books had titles sort of like How to Abuse People and Not Feel Bad. Okay, this guy's into motivational stuff, and he doesn't want to feel guilty about what he's doing. And so I cautioned my son. I said, I don't think this is a good fit because these are the kinds of books he's reading. He is going to take advantage of you because that's his job. Mm-hmm. And he was like a senior VP for Sears, I think, or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Well, if you look at the success motivation industry, it's almost like it has denominations. like church denominations. And one of them is this kind of hard-nosed. I read a book early on called Looking Out for Number One.
Yeah.
So there are those, they have no morals, no scruples. They just want to know how to control people, how to win at any cost. That's sort of a denomination within it. There's a lot of people that are totally turned off by that. They want to have the more beautiful and affirming type of a thing, and they're attracted in a different direction. So that's why, the industry it has nuances.
So I now fast forwarding to a few years forward after my savings and loan days, I was in church ministry, local church ministry. And this was around coming up to be, it was from like 84 to 87. And I was just hearing about Willow Creek Community Church. This is a new thing to me. And I was invited to a seminar, and at that, actually it was referred to, the name of it was the Spring Conference on Pastoral Enrichment, SCOPE, 1986. It was in northwest suburb, which I'll remember later probably. And the guest speaker was a guy I never heard of before. His name was Rick Warren. And he had not yet written anything of note. I had never heard of his church. It was called Saddleback Valley Community Church back then. Later, it's just Saddleback. And I was introduced to this thing called the Church Growth Movement, and I started collecting books. And one of the books that was almost in the canon of church growth literature at that time, I say almost, but even if it wasn't, we were very highly encouraged to read it, was the book In Search of Excellence.
Mm-hmm.
So would you classify that book as part of the success motivation industry literature?
I would say denominationally, that one's a little bit more on the other side of the spectrum, the real practical, here are good practices. I watched that film In Search of Excellence years ago, and it was just showing why are these companies so successful. And it showed how well they treated their employees, their motivational things, that a lot of it was decent stuff. It wasn't, there was no theology in it.
Right.
There was no explanation of the universe in it. It was just more best practices type of it.
And the impetus for books like that, and there were lots of them, was back then, the fear was Japan was, as they say, eating our lunch, as opposed to China nowadays. And this is a constant theme. Japan was making better. I mean, it's even in that movie Back to the Future where all the best stuff is made in Japan.
That's right,
Doc,
yeah. When we grew up, it was all the crummy stuff.
Right. So, but at the same time, it's a secular source with maybe some good wisdom, but how well does it import into the church?
Yeah, and that's the real danger, because behind all of it is a pragmatism that you're looking at. You want to get to this result, which is a lot of people in your churches. There's a lot of ways to get a lot of people in your churches that are unbiblical ways.
Right.
And so once you leave, what's our core purpose? We have a core purpose in the gospel. The results are up to God. We have to do things His way. But these churches started to get into, we notice when we do this and when we do that, we get all these people in here. And then these people come in and, they don't like theology that much, and they don't like to hear about sin. And so you start soft peddling sin, and that takes over the doctrinal stand of your church. Very, very dangerous. Doesn't look dangerous in the beginning. It's only later when you see the weakness of the churches that you see, okay, they swallowed the wrong kind of potion there.
So, okay.
I have one other thing I was going to mention before, if I could.
No, go ahead.
There's a big attraction for people who love science, who also feel like there is some sort of a mystical reality of some sort. A lot of the law of attraction and things like that, they give a pseudoscientific way that this works. It's like these, even it could be that at the atomic level, things are generating out. And so as opposed to giving a purely spiritual reason, they're trying to give us sort of a scientific reason, but it's pseudoscientific. And it attracts that kind of person who wants that. They want to know there's a reason this is happening.
Right. All right. I want to put out two names here and see where they play into all of this, if at all. One of them, Ron already alluded to earlier, Norman Vincent Peale.
I mentioned Napoleon Hill, but Norman Vincent Peale, I don't remember mentioning him, but he's a good name.
I thought you did, but if you didn't, I just did. So that's all.
Good job.
Norman Vincent Peale, who is, of course, Donald Trump cites him as sort of his pastor, if he went to church. I don't even know that. But is there anything Norman Vincent Peale teaches that's actually biblical? Is he biblical? How does that fit into all of this?
Well, before you go any further, one of the tracks that led me to the Lord was written by Norman Vincent Peale.
Okay.
I'm just going to throw that out there.
No, there's this kind of middle ground. They were almost like trying to link hands on both sides. Robert Schuller's another one of them. And they're trying to extract things from the positive thinking, from the success motivation realm, which they got from various different places. But they're also trying to still remain as biblical as possible. Like Norman Vincent Peale was still pastoring a church. And so they were syncretists, but they were sort of hovering around in the middle. And but it sort of is almost a gateway to go through them to the heavier stuff. So yeah, you probably heard, I don't know if you heard this joke about Norman Vincent Peale, but someone listened to the teachings of Norman Vincent Peale and the Apostle Paul, and they found Paul appealing and Peale appalling.
Yeah, I think you would.
Yeah.
The booklet I read was just a compilation of Bible verses with very, very brief commentary. And
theology light is what a lot of
it but it had it had a comment for a particular verse that really helped me, because I was totally new to the Bible. I wouldn't say he gave a really good explanation of salvation here, but it was it proved to be for me a stepping stone. And then after I stepped over all the stones, I looked back and then I heard about Norman Vincent Peale, and I realized, oh, well, it's kind of like God used him in spite of himself.
I find God does that a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I was heavily influenced by Jesus Christ Superstar before I was a believer, and I didn't realize how much it was unbiblical. It's just the excitement of the character of the person of Christ. It made me want to know more, even though it was obviously heretical.
Yeah.
Right. So okay, now you mentioned Robert Schuller, and an awful lot of what Schuller did kind of fits into this, and he picked it up from Maslow, who was into self-actualization,
right,
sorts of stuff, and so Schuller really used a lot of Maslow's teachings in even starting his church.
Mm-hmm.
So okay, that's interesting. But he influenced then Willow Creek, Saddleback, and others. So how does this idea of success motivation industry filter into the seeker-sensitive church? And another name I want to put out is Peter Drucker. How does he fit into all of that, if at all?
Yeah, Peter Drucker, I think, is more kind of real practical managerial type of stuff. I don't know if I've only read a little bit of him, and I didn't see that he was really getting into any sort of a metaphysical explanation of things. But I think Schuller and those who followed him, basically it was pragmatism. and they the success motivation is all about pragmatism. They want to do something because it works, and they're often not questioning, what's the spiritual reality? What does God think about this? They first want to be released from the idea that there's a judging God that is going to evaluate their life. And they want to look at it as, I'm in charge. Okay, once I'm in charge, I don't care about doctrine so much. I care about practical. What is going to bring results? Now, when you bring that into the church, now you've got big danger. And so they may not grab the whole meal, they may just take bites out of it, but it influences it. Like I said earlier, it influences the church and weakens the church over time, because people aren't studying scripture. They don't understand sin. They don't understand righteousness and holiness. What they really want is they want happiness, and they want a good life. Like you probably heard Justin Peters say, if this is your best life now, then you're on your way to hell, because this life is not your best life. But they don't want to hear that. They want to hear, this is the core meaning of life, is this life here. And we have to, as believers, we have to be detached from that, because we have to live for eternity. It means we're going to be very active. We believe in success, but we believe in success of God's word and God's way. And once we get pulled away from that based upon our own desires, we can be tempted and drawn away.
Yeah.
Right.
So where, if you're looking around in the church today, what examples of damage can you see that might be easy to see, or maybe not so easy to see, in the church, in the broader evangelical church? Where are you seeing this success motivation industry creating the most havoc?
I think the ones we've talked about, if you say the health and wealth, if we agree the health and wealth preachers are not evangelicals, we'll just leave them out. They've already gone. I mean, they're out. But among the pragmatists, what we just talked about, that's part of the damage, is to say, oh, let's find out what works. Let's define success, what it means for us, and let's figure out how to get there. And what the damage is you're less interested in studying the scriptures. The other damage, I would say, is not so much group damage, it's individuals. There's probably a lot of men in our strong churches, and some women, but it tends to be a male dominated, but there are women also involved, that when they go to church, they think they've kind of learned something higher and more powerful through the success motivation teaching, and they're less attracted, they're less excited about the preaching of the word after a while, because this other thing sounds more exciting to them. And so they may not even say anything. So you don't see the effect. The church is weaker because a part of it is weaker, but they may not be broadcasting it. So there's hidden damage that's going on.
I see. I mean, a name that pops into my head is somebody who has been kind of, I have found annoying for several years, Andy Stanley. And one of the things along the way that annoyed me was when he said, if you're not bringing your family to a mega church, basically was his message, you're hurting your kids' chances of growing as a Christian. In other words, bigger is better. We have, you bring your kids here to this mega church because we have so much more to offer than a typical small local church. So it's hard to know. Is there like a direct connection between him and the sources of these ideas, or is this something he just absorbed by osmosis? Is this something that's it's come into the water of evangelicalism that everybody's drinking from?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it, that it's influenced in many, many different ways, the way people think about what life ought to be. And the mega church idea is that it's kind of the superstar idea. You've got the superstar pastor, you've got the fantastic music, you've got all of these great children's programs. But if it's leaning toward entertainment, it doesn't matter if people love it. You know, the things that we love naturally are not from God. Our natural man does not love God. We don't want to hear about our sin. We don't want to be told to put to death sin and to think lowly of ourselves. We ought to think lowly of ourselves. If we knew how sinful we are, we would think even more lowly. They don't like that message, and it doesn't attract people. People are attracted to something. This is going to be fun and exciting. We're going to help your kids. We're going to help your marriage. We're just going to do all these wonderful things, and it's going to be your new family. But if you've removed the most central critical doctrines of sanctification, what good is it going to do eternally?
Yeah. So, I mean, Jesus Christ has become to us, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 1:30, righteousness, sanctification, redemption. So we're in him. Because of God, you are in him who has become to us righteousness, sanctification, and redemption. People want to separate those three.
Right.
You know, we're not saved by being sanctified, but you're a saint. And the other translation of that Greek word is you are sanctified. It's the same word in Greek. You know, you've been sainted, you've been sanctified. So that means you've been set apart for him. That's what it means.
Right,
and now
right.
You're going to spend the rest of your life being set more and more apart, because God is at work within you, both to will and to do his good pleasure. So, but people want to separate it out, and you end up with a version of the Christian life that some pastors and preachers can declare, they can proclaim it, but just try to get them to open up the Bible and show you where it says that in Scripture. That's where the problem is.
Yeah.
So,
So one of the things, and as I'm listening and talking through this on the success motivation industry and how it may impact individual Christians or even churches, I probably want to say just a couple of, it could be a few things. One, we're not really talking about what motivates someone to do something. We can't get to motivation. We can only see what they are doing and how it impacts others. So as I look at, let's say, the seeker-sensitive church, even the beginnings of that, so many, including myself, were in favor of it. But in reflection down the road, it occurred to me that I think Bill Hybels understood the nature of the church to begin with. If you are under the idea that the primary task of the church meeting is to give altar calls and proclaim the gospel in some way, so that more become believers as a result of that, that sounds like a noble task. But in reality, as we go through Scripture, what we find is the church really has one function, and that is to disciple and train, care for believers in that time of gathering. And so, Hybels looks at it and goes, well, if our task is to bring non-believers in order to give them the gospel, we're not effectively doing that. Let's try this other thing to be more successful at leading people to the Lord. The result is you abandon the ministry of the church, which is discipling and training believers, replace it with the mission of the church, which is the proclamation of the gospel that really happens outside with trained believers, and you end up with a weak church ultimately. Maybe big numbers, but very few that understand what the faith is. Is my analysis fair there, do you think?
Yeah, I think I understood that when I first heard about it, I understood the idea of attracting people so they can hear it. The problem is always a bait and switch, is that what people are attracted to, people are not attracted to the gospel. The seed that's on the shallow soil, people are shallow soil most, that it may spring up because they get excited. But what's going to happen? They're going to run into troubles and persecution, say, hey, I didn't sign up for this. What I came for is good things, good things, good things. I don't want all this negative stuff. And so you may think you're attracting them, keeping them in, but you're basically, they are changing the tenor of the church, right, by being there. And they can't disciple anybody. They're really useless spiritually. It's a hard thing to say, but that, the scriptures talk about people being useless. Peter says that. And you are useless if you have not really been saved. You could think you were saved because you were given some simple thing to do, and now you're part of the club, but now you're in the club for other things.
Right.
So this has been a big problem. This is we're shifting away from success motivation, but a lot of, if you go back to Phineas Quimby and trace out everything that came out of there, you'll start to see the influences that have, if anybody's interested in doing the history, start with Phineas Quimby, I would say.
Okay. Yeah. So that is important. So, again, we're back to be cautious what you engage in.
Absolutely.
We tend as humans to absorb our worldview through osmosis. It comes from the people we hang around with, the books we read, the magazines we read, the films we watch, and it kind of goes in unchecked. We don't ask the big question of what is the core idea they're trying to communicate to us through this.
Right.
What worldview is, and sometimes you can pick it up really clearly. I love The Matrix, and I love The Matrix for a couple reasons. One, it's entertaining, but the other is I can teach Eastern mysticism by watching the film.
That's right.
Right. And here's what's going on. Here's the worldview that's being communicated, and you can't do that always as clearly but be careful what it is that they're teaching, because they're teaching you something in the film.
Right. And I think something that ought to be said is one of the name of the game in the churches that are drifting is syncretism. Right. It's not going to be one full thing or the other. You can go in and you can hear a lot of good things in even some of these health and wealth groups. You'll if you're around it and you're in different parts of it, you're going to hear some good things. It's not going to be 100% of something. And that's especially true of the seeker-sensitive churches. There's a lot of great things being taught.
Right.
It's just that there's a lot of dangerous approaches and a lot of unbiblical thinking that is going on. But that's probably true in even our strongest churches, just because of sin. We're all going to be clouded in our thinking, and until our minds are fully transformed, which won't happen in this life, we're all in danger of being tempted into something that's going to pull us away from the truth.
Right. So, Mark, if someone wants your articles, I have links in the bottom. Now, that's to the magazines. If they actually want a copy of the article, how would they go about getting that?
That's a good question. I haven't separated the articles into their own thing. My intention is to take them and expand into a book, which I haven't done yet. But the only way to get them now would be 4 parts in 4 journals. But if they will, there's a contact page on our website. And if they will say, I'm interested in these articles, I will just send the rough articles because I've still got the rough articles before they were in the form of the journal.
Okay. So they are available, and that's how you would go about that.
Yeah, for now. And then later on our website, it'll be seen probably as a book.
Okay, good. Mark, thank you for being with us. We'll have to do this again in the future. Ron, would you care to walk us out of here?
Yes, let's give credit to whom credit is due. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Culinary services are provided by Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D Opposer. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polygamus. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau Chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, the humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham & Howe. Grievance resolution director is Giovanna P. Sami. Director of Privacy Assurances Wiretapping, and original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never, never, never.
It hasn't happened yet, so...
All right, Mark, thank you for being